Have you ever stopped to think about what really happened during the crucifixion of Jesus? Most people only know the official version: Roman soldiers, a wooden cross, a crowd shouting. But there's a revelation that few know, a spiritual dimension that changed the course of history. While everyone else saw just a man dying, two powerful archangels were leading the greatest spiritual military operation ever carried out. And the most surprising part, these same angels who defeated Lucifer that day are still active today, working on your behalf in ways you can't even imagine. Michael and Uriel weren't there as mere spectators. They had the authority to end it all in seconds, to turn that crucifixion into a display of heavenly power. But something much greater was happening, something that went far beyond saving Jesus. It was about saving you, your family, your dreams, your purpose. The transformation that took place in that moment changed the spiritual laws that govern your life even now. And here comes the part that will shock you. Lucifer knew exactly what he was losing at that moment. Have you ever wondered why this story has, in a way, been hidden over the centuries? Because it reveals a mystery that completely changes the way you see challenges, prayer, and spiritual authority. When you understand what Michael and Uriel actually did on the cross, you'll never feel helpless in a tough situation again. You'll never think that God is silent when it seems like nothing is happening. The truth is, there might be a massive angelic operation happening behind the scenes of your life and you don't even know it. What I'm about to share with you in the next few minutes isn't some complicated theological theory. It's a practical revelation you can apply today. When you're done watching, you'll understand why some of your prayers, which seemed unanswered, actually activated a chain of spiritual events that is changing your reality. You'll see why that impossible situation you're facing might be the exact place where God wants to show the same power that resurrected Jesus. The transformation starts now, and Michael and Uriel are waiting for you to discover the authority that's already yours. You know when you're watching a movie and you realize there's so much more going on than meets the eye? Well, that's exactly what happened during the crucifixion of Jesus. The people there only saw a man being executed by Roman soldiers, but there was a huge revelation unfolding in the invisible world. It was like there were two screens playing at the same time, one showing physical pain, the other revealing the divine plan unfolding. The angels Michael and Uriel were right there, not sitting idly by, but acting with a purpose no one could understand at that moment. These two archangels weren't there by chance. Michael, the commanding general of the heavenly army, had the power to end the whole situation in seconds, but he remained silent, waiting for orders. Uriel, the angel of divine wisdom, held secrets that weren't ready to be revealed yet. It was like having two superheroes ready to act, but following a much bigger script. They knew that the mystery of the cross had layers that we can't even begin to imagine. Their authority was being used in a way no one would expect. The most amazing part is that Jesus wasn't a victim of anything, do you get that? He was commanding a universal transformation. It's like when a doctor has to perform a painful surgery to save a patient's life. The angels understood that perfectly. They didn't intervene, because they knew that what seemed terrible was actually the medicine the entire world needed. It was like watching the end of a movie you already know, but having to let the whole story unfold. Every moment of suffering had a huge purpose behind it. The most incredible revelation is that this plan wasn't improvised. God didn't wake up one day and think, wow, people sinned, now I'll have to send my son. No, this was all planned before the foundation of the world. The angels were like VIP witnesses to divine authority, manifesting through what seemed like a total defeat. They saw eternal victory being achieved, while everyone else only saw death. Imagine the emotion these beings felt, seeing so much wisdom and love in action. Look, when you go through difficulties in life, you can apply this same perspective. Just like the angels saw beyond the crucifixion, we can also try to understand that some challenges might have a greater purpose. It's not about passively accepting anything, but developing that eagle-eyed perspective to see when something bad might be serving a greater good. The angels teach us that eternal perspective always outweighs the view of the moment, and that can lead to a real transformation in how we see things. The presence of Michael and Uriel there also teaches us something very important. The supernatural doesn't ignore the natural, it works through it. These powerful beings didn't pretend the crucifixion wasn't happening. They used that situation as a stage to manifest spiritual authority. In our lives, it's the same. The divine often works through normal situations to bring about extraordinary things. It's like an invisible partnership between heaven and earth that's always going on, even when we don't notice. The mystery of the crucifixion also teaches us about having divine patience instead of human anxiety. The angels could have solved everything instantly, but they respected the perfect timing. This is a challenge for us, to trust in the divine process even when we don't understand anything. How many times have you wanted God to act right now, without realizing that He might be preparing something much bigger? The angelic revelation invites us to expand our vision and trust in a wisdom that is much greater than ours. And finally, this event reminds us that we're never alone in our heaviest struggles. Just as Jesus had that invisible angelic company in His hardest moment, we too have the authority to call on heavenly help in our battles. This isn't mystical talk. It's about recognizing that there is a real spiritual dimension that can influence our physical reality. The crucifixion proves that the worst can become the best when you see it from the right perspective. And this prepares us to understand how that transformation continued to unfold afterward. Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when the sun disappears from the sky in the middle of the day? Well, that's exactly what happened during the crucifixion. For a full 3 hours, complete darkness covered the earth, but it wasn't just a weather or astronomical phenomenon. It was a revelation of what was happening in the spiritual world. Imagine the scene. Midday, and suddenly everything turns as dark as midnight. People must have been terrified, not realizing they were witnessing a cosmic battle between light and darkness. This darkness had a purpose far beyond what any natural phenomenon could explain. What many people don't understand is that this darkness wasn't just symbolic, it was literal and spiritual at the same time. It was as if two dimensions were colliding right there in front of everyone. The authority of darkness was being confronted by the authority of light in a way that had never been seen before. Michael and Uriel knew exactly what was happening. For them, those 3 hours were like watching the final round of a battle that had been going on since the beginning of time. The tension in the air wasn't just psychological, it was a real tension between massive spiritual forces. This darkness also represented the mystery of divine suffering. Jesus was experiencing something no human had ever lived, carrying the sin of all humanity. It was as if He was absorbing all the spiritual darkness in the world. The angels watched this incredible transformation take place. They saw the Son of God becoming sin, so that we could become righteousness. It's no wonder that even creation reacted with this supernatural darkness. The entire universe recognized the magnitude of what was happening. In our everyday lives, we also go through periods of spiritual darkness, times when it seems like God is silent and our prayers don't seem to reach the heavens. But the revelation of those 3 hours on the cross teaches us that God might be more active in the moments that seem the darkest. Just like the physical darkness in the crucifixion had a redemptive purpose, our own darkness might be used for our spiritual transformation. It's in the toughest moments that usually the greatest internal changes happen. What's interesting is that the angels didn't try to dispel this darkness. They knew it was necessary. It was part of the plan. Michael, with all his authority and power, could have illuminated the entire sky with just a movement, but he respected the process. Uriel, the guardian of divine wisdom, knew that this mystery had to unfold exactly that way. This teaches us that we shouldn't always try to escape our tough moments quickly. Sometimes they are essential for something greater to happen within us. The darkness also served as a kind of cosmic curtain, protecting humanity from seeing things it wasn't yet ready to comprehend. It was as if God was performing a spiritual surgery on the universe and needed privacy. The angels knew that this complete revelation could only be manifested gradually. Think about it. If people had seen the full spiritual dimension of what was happening, they probably wouldn't have been able to bear it. The physical darkness was a divine protection, allowing the eternal purpose to be fulfilled without causing mental collapse in the witnesses. Another powerful lesson is that darkness didn't defeat the light. It only enveloped it temporarily. Michael and Uriel knew that those 3 hours had a set deadline. It was a darkness with limited authority, not eternal. Similarly, when we go through dark periods, we need to remember that they too have an expiration date. The darkness can be intense, but it isn't permanent. The angels teach us that, even in the deepest shadows, the divine light continues to shine, preparing a transformation that goes far beyond what we can imagine. This supernatural darkness was like a cosmic declaration that something definitive was happening. It wasn't just any event, it was the event in history. The angels witnessed the moment when the authority of darkness began to be broken irreversibly. They knew that after those 3 hours, the spiritual world would never be the same. The darkness was creating the perfect environment for the greatest revelation of all time, while Michael and Uriel prepared for their specific roles in this divine plan. Imagine having 2 superheroes by your side, each with unique powers, but both following a script you can't fully see. That's how Michael and Uriel were positioned during the crucifixion. Michael, the archangel of war, was there with all his heavenly military authority, but he received a very specific order to observe and protect, but not to attack. Uriel, the guardian of divine wisdom, held secrets that were not yet time to fully reveal. The most impressive revelation is that these 2 powerful beings were aware of every detail of the divine plan, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. Michael is known in the scriptures as the one who fights against the dragon, the prince who defends the people of God. He had the power to end that injustice in seconds. He could have descended with legions of angels and turned that crucifixion into an epic display of heavenly power. But this time he received a different mission, to guard the mystery of redemption without physically intervening. It was like having an experienced general who knows exactly when to strike and when to strategically retreat. His transformation from an active warrior to a silent guardian showed that even angels need to adjust their roles according to the greater divine purpose. Uriel, on the other hand, is the angel who carries the light of God's wisdom. He knew things that even the other angels didn't fully understand at that moment. It was like having access to the full script of a movie, while everyone else could only see one scene at a time. The revelation Uriel held wasn't just about the crucifixion, but about all the eternal consequences that would come afterward. He saw the resurrection, he saw souls being freed, he saw the universal transformation that this seemingly pointless death would produce. That's why he was able to remain calm while everyone around him was in despair. What makes this duo even more fascinating is how they worked in perfect teamwork. Michael provided the protection and authority needed so that nothing interfered with the plan, while Uriel kept the wisdom and revelation flowing at the right time. It was like having a bodyguard and a counselor working together. They didn't compete against each other, but complemented each other's roles. This angelic partnership teaches us something powerful about how we should work together in our own spiritual journey, combining practical action with divine wisdom, strength with purpose. In our lives, we can apply the principles these angels demonstrated. Sometimes we need the authority of Michael, taking firm stands and defending what is right. For example, when you need to set healthy boundaries in relationships or defend your values in difficult situations. At other times, we need the wisdom of Uriel, holding on to information until the right moment to act. Like when you have an important insight, but know it's not yet time to share, or when you need to be patient for a situation to unfold naturally. The mystery lies in knowing which function to use at each moment. Their presence at the crucifixion also reveals that God never leaves us alone in our most critical moments. Michael and Uriel were there not just as observers, but as active participants in a plan of transformation. They show us that even when it seems like we are facing impossible situations, there is a heavenly authority working on our behalf. It's not about magic or positive thinking. It's about recognizing that there is a real spiritual dimension that can influence our physical reality in ways we don't always perceive. Michael and Uriel also teach us about divine timing versus human urgency. They could have solved everything instantly, but they respected the schedule set by the Father. How many times do we want God to act our way and in our time, without realizing that He might be orchestrating something far grander? The angelic revelation challenges us to trust the process, even when we don't understand all the details. It's like being in a play where you only know your part, but trust the director knows how everything will come together perfectly. These two archangels show us that true spiritual authority isn't about forceful imposition, but about alignment with the divine purpose. Michael didn't use his traditional military strength, and Uriel didn't reveal everything he knew. Both exercised a more subtle type of power. They knew their true strength lay in following the bigger plan, not acting independently. This angelic wisdom prepares us to understand how Jesus also exercised a revolutionary kind of authority during his last moments on the cross, an authority that would forever transform the concept of power and salvation. Have you ever stopped to think that the crucifixion wasn't a plan B for God? Many people imagine that God looked at humanity, saw the mess it was in, and thought, wow, now I have to improvise a solution. But the most incredible revelation is that this plan of salvation was written even before the foundation of the world. It was like an architect who designs every detail of a house before laying the first brick. Jesus wasn't a victim of circumstances. He was executing a divine project with an eternal purpose. Michael and Uriel knew this, which is why they could remain calm, seeing something that appeared to be a tragedy, but in reality was a victory being won. What makes this plan even more impressive is that it wasn't created as a reaction to sin, but as a prevention. God knew from the beginning that humanity would need rescue, so he already had the solution prepared. It's like those parents who know their child will get hurt learning to ride a bike, so they already have the band-aid ready. Divine authority was manifested through the apparent failure of the crucifixion. The angels saw beyond temporal death and looked at the eternal victory that was being won. It was impossible for them not to be moved, seeing so much wisdom and love in action at the same time. The brilliance of this plan was in using humanity's greatest weakness, death, as a weapon against the enemy itself. It was a brilliant celestial military strategy. Let the enemy think they were winning, while in reality they were digging their own defeat. Michael, being an experienced military strategist, must have been impressed with this tactic. Jesus wasn't being defeated, he was defeating death through death itself. This transformation of the concept of victory is something only the divine mind could have devised. The mystery of salvation was exactly in this, turning defeat into victory, weakness into strength. In our lives, we can apply this perspective of the divine plan when we face situations that seem hopeless. Just like the crucifixion seemed like the end of everything, but was actually the beginning of the greatest transformation in history, our hardest moments can be exactly where God is preparing our greatest victory. For example, when you lose a job that seemed perfect, it might be that God is making space for something much better. When a relationship ends painfully, it could be divine protection for something healthier in the future. The angelic revelation teaches us to trust in the bigger plan, even when we can only see a small part of the story. The salvation plan also shows us how God works through paradoxes. He uses what is weak to confound what is strong, what is foolish to shame what is wise. Michael and Uriel saw this paradoxical authority in action. A king crowned with thorns, a savior executed like a criminal, life springing from death. It was the complete opposite of what any human strategy would have done. But this is exactly the difference between human wisdom and divine wisdom. The eternal purpose doesn't follow our limited logic. It completely transcends our expectations. The crucifixion also reveals that God's love isn't sentimental. It's strategic. It wasn't just a divine romantic gesture. It was a calculated spiritual military operation to rescue all of humanity. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing when he said, "It is finished." It wasn't giving up. It was mission accomplished. The angels witnessed the moment when the authority of darkness was legally broken. It was like watching a brilliant lawyer winning the most important case in the history of the universe. The complete revelation of this plan would only unfold in the events that followed. Another fascinating aspect is that this plan even included the negative reactions of people. God knew that the religious would reject Jesus, that the politicians would condemn him, and that the crowd would demand his crucifixion. And he used even those negative reactions as part of the salvation strategy. It's like a chess player who turns every move of the opponent into their own advantage. Michael and Uriel saw how every action that seemed contrary to the plan was actually fulfilling the plan. This transformation of evil into good is something only divine wisdom can orchestrate. The salvation plan teaches us that God never wastes anything. Every tear, every pain, every injustice suffered by Jesus had a specific redemptive purpose. Nothing was in vain. Everything served to break some spiritual barrier that separated humanity from God. The angels witnessed the moment when the ancient religious barriers which controlled who could approach God were definitively broken. It was a spiritual revolution happening through the one who seemed to be defeated, but who was in fact winning the most important battle in history and directing that victory toward an even bolder mission. When Jesus cried out, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," on the cross, most people thought it was just a cry of despair. But Michael and Uriel knew that it was much more than an expression of pain. It was a spiritual command, an authority being exercised in a dimension that human eyes couldn't see. Imagine a general giving a crucial order in the middle of a battle, but on a frequency that only his specialized soldiers can hear. The angels were tuned to that divine frequency, awaiting specific instructions. That cry had a purpose far beyond what anyone there could understand. It was a revelation of how Jesus maintained total control, even in the most extreme moment. The interesting part is that Jesus didn't lose his divine authority by suffering as a human. It was as if he was operating in two dimensions simultaneously, experiencing physical and emotional pain as a man, but maintaining spiritual command as God. Michael and Uriel saw this duality in action. They knew that every word Jesus spoke on the cross wasn't random, but carried specific instructions for the spiritual world. It was an incredible mystery. The creator of the universe, using his last physical strength to coordinate a universal rescue operation. The transformation happening wasn't just on Earth, but in all dimensions of existence. This spiritual command also reveals how Jesus had total awareness of what was happening, even amid extreme suffering. He wasn't confused or lost. He was executing each step of the salvation plan with surgical precision. It was like watching a conductor leading a complex symphony, where every movement had a specific meaning. The angels recognized this authority and positioned themselves according to the instructions they received. Michael prepared for his next role, while Uriel kept the secrets that would still be revealed. The most impressive revelation is that Jesus maintained control of the situation even when he appeared completely vulnerable. In our own lives, we can apply this principle of maintaining spiritual authority, even in moments of physical or emotional weakness. When you're going through a tough situation, it might seem like you've lost control of everything. But Jesus shows us that it's possible to stay connected to the divine and exercise spiritual authority even in our worst moments. For example, when you're facing illness, you can exercise authority over fear and anxiety through prayer and trust. When you're in a financial crisis, you can maintain authority over despair, choosing to trust in a higher purpose. The mystery lies in learning to operate in both of these dimensions at the same time. Jesus' command also teaches us about the power of our words in critical moments. Every word he spoke on the cross was filled with eternal purpose. Michael and Uriel knew that these words weren't just human expressions, but divine decrees being established. Likewise, our words in moments of crisis hold spiritual power. When you declare faith instead of murmuring, when you choose to bless instead of curse, you are exercising real spiritual authority. It's like having access to a celestial communication system that few know how to use. Transformation begins when we learn to speak the language of heaven, even in the midst of earthly circumstances. Jesus also demonstrated that true spiritual leadership isn't about personal comfort, but about fulfilling a greater purpose. He could have used his authority to ease his own pain, but he chose to direct it toward universal salvation. Michael and Uriel saw this choice and were even more impressed by divine wisdom. It was like watching a king renounce his personal privileges to secure the freedom of his people. This revelation challenges us to rethink our concept of leadership and authority. True power isn't about controlling others, but about having control over oneself for the sake of something greater. Jesus' spiritual command also reveals how the invisible world responds to legitimate authority. The angels didn't hesitate to follow his instructions, even when they seemed contradictory to what was happening physically. It was like experienced soldiers who trust their commander completely, even when the strategy seems strange. This teaches us that when we exercise genuine spiritual authority, the spiritual world responds. It's not about manipulation or trying to force results, but about alignment with divine will. Transformation happens when our authority is in tune with the eternal purpose. This moment shows that Jesus never lost communication with the Father, even when he temporarily felt separated because of the sin he was carrying. His spiritual authority continued to function because it was based not on momentary feelings, but on his identity. Michael and Uriel knew that the feeling of abandonment was temporary and necessary for the fulfillment of the plan. Our connection with God works the same way. It doesn't depend on how we feel, but on who we are in him. This understanding of Jesus' spiritual authority prepares us to understand how he directed that same authority for his next mission in the world of the dead. Have you ever been in a really tense situation where your friends completely understand their roles without you having to explain anything? That's how Michael and Uriel operated during the crucifixion. Michael wasn't there to do what he usually did, fight against physical enemies. This time his mission was to protect something far more delicate, the spiritual transaction happening between Jesus and all of humanity. It was like having the best bodyguard in the universe, protecting not just your body, but your soul during the most vulnerable moment. His military authority was redirected to an entirely new function, showing that even angels need to adapt as the divine purpose changes. Michael's role was to ensure nothing interfered with the process of redemption. Imagine the responsibility. Any distraction or external intervention could compromise the universal salvation plan. He was like a chief surgeon, ensuring the operating room remained sterile during an operation that would save millions of lives. It wasn't about fighting Romans or Pharisees. It was about keeping the divine revelation flowing without obstacles. Michael knew his real battle wasn't against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces that wanted to sabotage that cosmic transformation. It was an authority exercised through silent protection, not loud warfare. Uriel, on the other hand, had an even subtler mission, to release waves of divine light at the exact right moment. It wasn't physical light that people could see, but spiritual revelation that would illuminate the hearts of the prepared. It was like having a cosmic lighting technician who knew exactly when to turn on each light during the most important show in history. That divine light was revealing truths to the righteous who were waiting, allowing them to understand what was truly happening. Uriel knew that his authority wasn't in keeping secrets forever, but in releasing them at the perfect timing. It was a transformation of his traditional role, from guardian to active revealer. In our lives, we can learn from this angelic adaptability. Sometimes God calls us to exercise our authority in ways that are different from the usual. For example, if you are someone who is naturally assertive like Michael, you may be called to protect instead of attack, to guard instead of confront. If you are naturally wise like Uriel, you may need to share knowledge instead of keeping it, be transparent instead of mysterious. The mystery is in recognizing when God wants to use our gifts in unconventional ways. Revelation comes when we understand that our purpose can manifest through functions completely different from what we expected. The teamwork of these two archangels also teaches us about divine complementarity. Michael provided the necessary protection, while Uriel provided revelation at the right moment. One didn't compete with the other. Both worked in sync for a greater purpose. It was like having a drummer and a guitarist in a band, each with their specific role, but creating music together. This partnership challenges us to rethink how we work with others. Instead of trying to do everything alone, why not recognize that your authority can be enhanced when complemented by the authority of another person? Transformation happens when we stop competing and start collaborating. Their discretion is also impressive. Michael and Uriel were doing monumental work, but in almost invisible ways. There were no spotlights, no public recognition, no applause. It was spiritual authority being exercised behind the scenes. This teaches us that the most important work often happens away from human eyes. When you pray for someone in secret, when you help someone without expecting credit, when you exercise your faith in silence, you are following the angelic model. The deepest revelation is that God sees and values these invisible actions, even when no one else notices. The eternal purpose is fulfilled through these silent transformations. Michael and Uriel also show us that true authority doesn't need to be proven all the time. They had the power to do spectacular things, but chose to exercise restraint when needed. It was like having a powerful weapon in a holster, ready to use if necessary, but with the wisdom to know when not to use it. This angelic maturity challenges us to develop the same kind of balanced authority. It's not about showing power all the time, but about using it with a specific purpose. A revelation comes when we understand that true strength sometimes manifests through patience and perfect timing. They teach us that each person has a unique function in the divine plan, but all functions are equally important. Michael was no more important than Uriel and vice versa. Both were essential for that universal transformation to happen. Similarly, your role in life may seem small compared to others, but it is unique and necessary. The authority God has given you is not to be compared with anyone else's authority. It is to be exercised in your specific space. This understanding of the individual role of each angel prepares us to understand how Jesus used his own authority to invade a territory that no one before him had ever been able to conquer. After Jesus died on the cross, the story didn't end. In fact, it was just beginning, and with it, the most incredible part. He descended to Sheol, which is not the hell that many people think of, but the realm of the dead, where souls awaited. It was like a cosmic waiting room, where the righteous and the unrighteous were separated, but all were bound by the authority of death. Jesus didn't descend there as a visitor or spiritual tourist. He descended with a specific purpose, to defeat death in its own territory. Michael and Uriel knew that this was the most crucial part of the mission. It was an unprecedented revelation in history, someone entering the realm of death not as a victim, but as a conqueror. Sheol was basically a spiritual prison where death reigned supreme. Imagine a place where neither hope nor despair made sense because there was no possibility of change. The souls were there waiting, but waiting for what? They didn't even know. Then Jesus appeared with all his divine authority intact. It was like a liberator arriving at a prison and declaring a general amnesty. The difference was that he wasn't just freeing prisoners, he was destroying the entire prison system. The transformation that happened in Sheol was so radical that it changed the spiritual rules of all existence. The mystery of death, which seemed invincible, was being unraveled and defeated. Jesus didn't need to physically fight in Sheol because his authority was based on something far more powerful: legal justice. It was like a lawyer walking into a court with perfect documentation to annul all the unjust sentences. He had paid the full price for sin on the cross, so now he had the legal right to rescue the souls that were imprisoned by debts he himself had paid. Michael must have been impressed watching this celestial legal strategy in action. It wasn't about brute power, it was about legitimate authority. The most incredible revelation is that Jesus turned his own death into the key that opened all spiritual prisons. In our lives, we can apply this principle of legal authority to situations that seem unsolvable. When you're facing something that feels like a prison, whether it's addiction, fear, guilt, or any destructive pattern, you can exercise the same authority Jesus demonstrated. For example, when guilt tries to keep you trapped in the past, you have the legal authority to declare that you've been forgiven. When fear tries to paralyze your future, you have a higher purpose that surpasses any intimidation. Transformation happens when you understand that you have already been legally set free, even if you haven't fully experienced that freedom in practice yet. The descent into Sheol also shows us that Jesus went to the utmost lengths to rescue us. He didn't stay comfortably in heaven sending instructions. He personally descended to the darkest place of existence to seek those who were lost. It was like a father descending into a deep well to rescue his child, even knowing the risks. This revelation of divine love goes far beyond romantic sentiment. It's practical, strategic love that takes real action. Michael and Uriel saw this love in action and understood that there is no place so dark that divine love cannot reach. It's authority based on total commitment, not convenience. Jesus also demonstrated that sometimes victory requires going directly to the heart of the problem. He could have defeated death in many other ways, but he chose to enter its territory to conquer it from the inside out. It was like a beneficial virus entering the system to destroy the harmful virus from within. This strategy teaches us that sometimes we need to face our fears and problems head-on, instead of trying to go around them. When dealing with past traumas, you may need to revisit those memories with a new authority to redefine them. The mystery lies in understanding that facing something doesn't mean suffering. It means exercising authority over what once controlled you. The transformation that happened in Sheol was so radical that it changed the rules for the entire universe. Before Jesus' descent, death was the end of everything. After it, death became a transition. The souls that had been trapped for millennia suddenly saw the doors open. It was like prisoners on death row discovering that they had been exonerated and would even receive compensation. Michael and Uriel witnessed the greatest jailbreak in universal history. It wasn't an escape. It was a legal liberation based on legitimate divine authority. The complete revelation of this victory was still being processed by all the celestial beings. The descent to Sheol shows us that there is no situation so hopeless that is beyond the reach of divine authority. Jesus descended to the place that represented the final defeat and turned it into a launching pad for eternal victory. This means that any Sheol you are facing, depression, addiction, toxic relationships, stagnation, can be transformed into a springboard for transformation. The authority that freed souls in Sheol is still available today to free you from any prison you find yourself in. Michael and Uriel knew that this victorious descent of Jesus was just the first act of an even greater revelation yet to come. Imagine the most epic moment of any action movie you've ever seen, but multiply that by 1,000 and place it in a spiritual dimension. Jesus entered Sheol not as a refugee or victim, but as an invader with total authority. It was like a legitimate king reclaiming his territory that had been illegally occupied. Michael and Uriel witnessed this invasion, knowing it wouldn't be a conventional battle. There would be no swords, shields, or marching armies. The most incredible revelation is that Jesus invaded the kingdom of darkness using exactly the opposite of what any military strategist would recommend. He used his own death as a weapon of war. It was a complete transformation of the concept of invasion and conquest. The kingdom of darkness was accustomed to authority based on fear, intimidation, and brute force. Then Jesus appeared there, exercising authority based on love, justice, and sacrifice. It was like walking into a gang of criminals, not with bigger weapons, but with a proposal that made crime completely unnecessary. The darkness simply had no defense against this kind of attack. Michael must have been fascinated watching this strategy in action. It was high-level spiritual warfare, but using principles completely opposite to what he knew. The revelation was that true authority doesn't need to destroy to win. It can transform the battlefield itself. Jesus didn't need an army because he himself was the entire army. It was like a bomb disposal expert who doesn't need a team because he has enough knowledge and authority to solve everything alone. He claimed the keys of death and hell not through combat, but through a purpose fulfilled. Every step he took in enemy territory was based on legal right, not strength. It was like a legitimate owner reclaiming his house that had been invaded. He didn't need to ask for permission or negotiate. He simply exercised his natural authority. The mystery of this invasion is that it was both war and reconciliation at the same time. In our lives, we can apply this spiritual invasion strategy when facing territories dominated by fear, lies, or hopelessness. For example, when you need to invade a toxic work environment, you can do so not with aggressiveness, but by exercising authority based on integrity and excellence. When confronting problematic relationships, you can invade those spaces with genuine love instead of manipulation or emotional blackmail. Transformation happens when you understand that your authority doesn't need to destroy others to be effective. The revelation comes when you realize you can conquer territories through purpose and character, not through force. Jesus' invasion also demonstrated that he perfectly knew the enemy's territory. It wasn't a blind attack. It was a surgical operation carried out by someone who knew exactly where all the weaknesses of the system were. It was like an ethical hacker who knows all the codes and passwords because he himself helped create the original system. Michael and Uriel saw Jesus moving in Sheol with total familiarity. After all, he was the creator of that place before it was corrupted by darkness. This authority based on intimate knowledge teaches us that we need to truly understand what we want to transform. It's pointless to try to change situations we don't fully comprehend. What's most impressive is that this invasion was both destructive and constructive at the same time. Jesus destroyed the power of death, but built bridges of hope. He destroyed spiritual prisons, but built pathways to freedom. It was like an urban reformer, tearing down unsafe buildings, but constructing something better in their place. Michael, accustomed to wars that left battlefields devastated, saw a war that left the conquered territory better than before. The revelation of this duality teaches us that true authority always builds while removing obstacles. Real transformation isn't just about eliminating what is wrong, but about establishing what is right. Jesus also showed that effective spiritual invasion is about claiming authority, not proving superiority. He didn't descend to Sheol to humiliate the darkness or demonstrate power. He went there to rescue what was his by right. It was like a father seeking his kidnapped children. The motivation wasn't revenge against the kidnappers, but love for the children. Michael and Uriel understood that authority driven by love is infinitely more powerful than authority driven by ego or anger. The purpose of the invasion wasn't to destroy enemies, but to free prisoners. This transformation of motivation completely changes the nature and results of spiritual warfare. The invasion of the kingdom of darkness teaches us that there are territories in our lives that need to be reclaimed with divine authority. These might be areas of the mind dominated by negative thoughts, the heart controlled by hurts, or behavior hijacked by addictions. Jesus showed us that we can reclaim these spaces not through our own effort, but by exercising the authority he won for us. The most liberating truth is that you don't need to negotiate with darkness. You have legal right to simply take back what is yours. Michael and Uriel knew that this victorious descent of Jesus was just the beginning of something even more glorious that was about to happen. The true resurrection of Jesus didn't begin on Sunday morning when he emerged from the tomb. It began in Sheol, at the exact moment he conquered death in its own territory. It was like a world champion boxer who not only won the fight but retired the opponent forever. Michael and Uriel witnessed the historic moment when death, which had always held the final authority over every living being, suddenly found itself defeated and stripped of its power. The most incredible revelation is that Jesus didn't just defeat his own death. He broke the entire system that had kept death as the universal queen. It was a transformation that changed the rules of the game for all of humanity, both present and future. Jesus brought with him liberated souls when he resurrected. It wasn't just a personal victory, it was a collective rescue. Imagine a war prisoner who not only escapes the prison but frees all the other prisoners and destroys the prison so that no one else can ever be captured there again. That's what was happening in the spiritual dimensions. Michael must have been moved watching this divine generosity. Jesus could have resurrected alone, but he chose to bring a multitude with him. His authority over death was so complete that he could share it with others. The mystery of the resurrection is that it wasn't just individual but collective and contagious. Victory over death also established a legal precedent in the spiritual world. It was like a legal case that set a precedent for all future decisions. Before Jesus, when someone died, death had final and unquestionable authority. After Jesus, death lost that status as the final decision maker. Michael and Uriel knew that this change in spiritual law would impact every person born from that moment on. Death would continue to exist physically, but it lost its definitive spiritual authority. It was a transformation in the universal laws governing existence. The complete revelation of this victory is still unfolding throughout history. In our practical lives, we can apply this victory over death to situations that seem dead or hopeless. For example, when a relationship seems to have died, you can exercise resurrecting authority over it through forgiveness, honest dialogue, and renewed love. When a career seems to have come to an end, you can apply resurrection principles through reinvention, new learning, and rediscovered purpose. Transformation happens when you understand that end is no longer a final word in the vocabulary of one who has resurrection authority. What is dead can live again. What is finished can restart. Jesus also demonstrated that resurrection isn't just about returning to what was before, but about becoming something better. When he resurrected, he didn't return exactly the same as he was. He had a glorified body with expanded capabilities. It was like a software that wasn't just restored after a crash, but received an update that made it much more powerful. Michael and Uriel witnessed this qualitative transformation, not just a quantitative one. The resurrection wasn't just about defeating death, but about transcending the limitations that death represented. This revelation teaches us that when God restores something in our lives, it often comes back better than it was before. Jesus' victory over death also shows us that true authority sometimes needs to go through the deepest valley to reach the highest peak. He had to descend to the lowest place of existence to conquer the highest authority. It was like a diver who goes down to the ocean's depths to retrieve a rare pearl. The deeper the dive, the more valuable the treasure. Michael and Uriel understood that this journey through death wasn't punishment or an accident, but a necessary strategy for a complete victory. The mystery teaches us that our toughest moments may be the very preparation for our greatest victories. The deepest transformation often happens after the darkest valleys. The resurrection also established Jesus as the firstborn among the dead. He wasn't just the first to resurrect, but he paved the way for others to follow the same path. It was like an explorer who not only discovers new land, but also builds roads for others to reach it too. Michael and Uriel knew that this authority of Jesus over death wasn't exclusive to him, but was being made available to all of humanity. It was a revelation of divine generosity. He conquered to be able to share. The purpose of the victory wasn't personal privilege, but universal benefit. The victory over death teaches us that there is authority available to overcome anything that seems final or definitive in our lives. If Jesus overcame death, the final enemy, then we have authority to overcome any lesser enemy. Whether it's fear, guilt, addiction, depression, or anything else that seems to have the final word over your destiny. Michael and Uriel knew that this victory of Jesus was just the beginning of a series of victories that would be made available to anyone who believed. The most radical transformation is understanding that you don't have to accept any defeat as final. The revelation of the resurrection is that where Jesus overcame, you too can overcome. Sometimes we look at the world and it seems like God is silent, like nothing is happening, like our prayers aren't being heard. But the most powerful revelation of the crucifixion and resurrection is that God may be more active precisely in the moments that seem the quietest. While people saw only a man dying on a cross, Michael and Uriel were witnessing the greatest spiritual operation in universal history unfolding simultaneously. It was like watching two movies at once, the visible human drama and the invisible celestial epic. The divine purpose continues to unfold, even when our physical eyes cannot perceive what's happening in the spiritual background. Michael and Uriel are still on mission today. They didn't retire after Jesus' resurrection. In fact, they entered a new phase of authority and responsibility. Michael is still the archangel who fights for God's people, but now he has much greater legal authority because of Jesus' victory. Uriel is still the guardian of divine wisdom, but now he can reveal mysteries that were once sealed. It's like soldiers who receive promotions and more advanced equipment after an important victory. The transformation that took place on the cross and in the resurrection expanded the possibilities for angelic action in favor of humanity. Jesus' sacrifice truly was a divine strategy to restore everything that was lost. It wasn't improvisation or plan B, it was plan A from the very beginning. Michael and Uriel knew that every tear, every drop of blood, every moment of agony had a specific restorative purpose. It was like a surgeon who needs to cause temporary pain to heal a permanent disease. The most incredible revelation is that God used the greatest evil in history, the crucifixion of his innocent son, to produce the greatest good possible, universal salvation. This divine authority to transform evil into good continues to operate today in the life of every person who trusts in the greater plan. In your personal life, you can apply this perspective of invisible angelic mission. When you're going through difficulties and it seems like no one cares, remember that there is an active spiritual dimension working on your behalf. For example, when you pray for a difficult situation, angels may be sent to create favorable circumstances that you can't even imagine. When you're facing spiritual opposition, Michael may be fighting invisible battles to protect you. The transformation in your perspective happens when you begin to recognize that you are never alone, even when you feel completely isolated. The mystery is learning to trust in what you cannot see. The divine strategy also teaches us that restoration is usually a process, not an instant event. Jesus could have restored everything with the snap of his fingers, but he chose a process that included suffering, death, and resurrection. Michael and Uriel witnessed every step of this process, knowing that each moment was necessary for the final outcome. Similarly, when God is restoring areas of your life, you may have to go through a process that includes some deaths before the final resurrection. The revelation is to trust that the entire process is under divine authority, even the painful parts. The final purpose is worth every step of the process. Michael and Uriel also teach us about strategic patience. They had the power to resolve everything instantly, but they respected the divine timing because they knew it was perfect. How many times do you become anxious, wanting God to speed things up, without realizing he might be coordinating variables you don't even know? Angelic authority teaches us that there's a difference between unnecessary delay and strategic timing. When you learn to distinguish between these two, you can rest in the process instead of fighting against it. Transformation comes when you align your urgency with divine patience. The divine plan also reveals that nothing is wasted in the heavenly economy. Every difficult experience, every tear shed, every moment of confusion can be raw material for something glorious that is being built. Michael and Uriel saw how Jesus even turned his agony into an instrument of salvation. This means that your own difficulties don't have to be seen just as obstacles, but as opportunities for transformation. The most liberating revelation is that God can use anything, even your failures and wounds, as part of a greater restorative plan. Your story doesn't need to be perfect to be useful in the eternal purpose. The message from Michael and Uriel is that the same God who orchestrated the greatest victory in history through the greatest apparent tragedy is still working in your circumstances today. The authority that resurrected Jesus is available to resurrect dead dreams, broken relationships, and lost hopes. The mystery of faith is trusting that God is weaving something beautiful with all the threads of your story, even the dark and confusing ones. Michael and Uriel continue on mission, and you are part of that mission. Your life is not a cosmic accident. It's divine purpose unfolding through human circumstances. The final revelation is that you are being used in a transformation much bigger than you can imagine. After everything you've learned about Michael and Uriel in the Crucifixion, one crucial question hangs in the air. What will you do with this revelation? Because knowing that angelic authority is working on your behalf is one thing, but living as someone who truly believes that is another. The transformation that Jesus won on the cross wasn't meant to be kept on a shelf as simple theoretical knowledge. It was meant to be applied to your real life, your real struggles, your real challenges. Are you facing a situation that seems impossible right now? Something that wakes you up in the middle of the night, worrying? That area of your life that seems dead and you've given up on believing in transformation? It's exactly there that Michael and Uriel want to demonstrate the same authority they exercised on the cross. But they need your cooperation, your active faith, your purpose aligned with the divine plan. The question isn't whether God can act. The question is, will you allow him to act through the revelation you just received? How many people around you are going through tough times, thinking they're alone? How many of your friends need to hear that there is an active spiritual dimension working on their behalf? The knowledge you've gained today isn't just for your personal benefit. Michael and Uriel worked for a universal transformation. Now it's your responsibility to be a part of that transformation in the lives of others. How can you apply this angelic authority in your relationships, your work, your community? I'm going to challenge you. Choose an area of your life that feels dead or hopeless. It could be a dream you abandoned, a relationship that needs restoration, a difficult financial situation, or anything causing discouragement. Now apply the mystery of resurrection that Jesus demonstrated. Begin to exercise spiritual authority over that situation through specific prayer, practical action, and expectation of transformation. Give this experiment 30 days and see how Michael and Uriel work behind the scenes. But here's the most important part. You need to stop living as a victim of circumstances and start living as someone who has real spiritual authority. No more accepting defeat as the final word. No more thinking you don't have a specific purpose in the divine plan. The same angels who terrified Lucifer on the cross are available to work in your personal story. The revelation means nothing if it doesn't bring practical transformation to your daily life. Do you want to keep learning about the spiritual secrets that can revolutionize your life? Want to discover more about how angels work behind the scenes of human situations? Then subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because I have many more revelations to share with you. The next story I'll tell will show how Archangel Gabriel changed the destiny of an entire nation through a single transformation in the life of an ordinary person. And tell me in the comments, which area of your life will you start applying the angelic authority you discovered today? I want to know how Michael and Uriel will work in your personal story. Your transformation could inspire and encourage others who are watching. Remember, you're not alone on this journey, and your victory is part of a much bigger purpose than you realize.